Good morning, great morning, guys. Welcome to another fabulous episode of Exit Strategies Radio Show. Hey, I am your host, Corwyn J, Melette, broker and owner of Exit Realty, Lowcountry Group in beautiful North Charleston, South Carolina. Hey, if this is your first time listening to this show, hey, you are in for a treat because our mission is very simple. That is to empower our community through financial literacy and real estate education. Guys, we're legacy building here. That is what we do. So, guys, I'm super excited today for today's show, but you know I got to give a shout out to my peoples, to our folks that tune in faithfully. Y'all are listening to us from all the way out there in Hollywood, what you know no good, all the way through Monkey's Corner, and y'all know my mama live out there, y'all. Got to shout out Pastor Evans, Elder Evans, y'all rock. That's Vanderbilt Senior. If I don't say that senior, that dude will snatch me up. And look here, those folks in the Muddy Mud and Mullins and Marion, guys, thank y'all so much for tuning in. Today, we have a very special guest. I won't embarrass him by telling him how much I appreciate him and love him on air. So what I just said, y'all can completely disregard that. But he is an expert. He's a go-to, a sounding board for me as it relates to what happens in the real estate space here in South Carolina. So I'm very humble, very fortunate that I was able to get booked on his calendar because this guy be going. Y'all think I'll be on the move. This guy moves more than me. We have none other than Nick Kremydas. He is the CEO of South Carolina REALTORS. Nick, how are you doing today?
Hey, Corwyn. The honor is mine. Thank you for inviting me to be part of the program today.
Oh, look at you. Got to be humble. I get it. So, Nick, if you don't mind, most people have no idea, first and foremost, what a realtor is, but more importantly, what your role is and what you do, and obviously where you come from, how you got there, et cetera. So if you don't mind, give our folks kind of that high level 30, 40, 50,000 foot view of who you are and then what you do, and obviously the importance and value of realtor.
Absolutely. First of all, I am a resident of the PD. I love my Florence roots and grew up there. My mom and dad were Greek immigrants who raised me with a very strong work ethic and worked in the restaurant business like a lot of Greek families still do today. Taught me very early on the importance of customer service, something that I've carried into my law career and working here with the Realtor Association, where I've been for the last 30 years. It's hard to believe. Time flies when you're having fun, for sure. The Realtor organization is the largest trade association in South Carolina. We represent more than 30,000 Realtor members from all across the state. You have to have a real estate license before you can become a Realtor. We're the professional trade association. Your license is issued, of course, by the state licensing authority, the Real Estate Commission. And our job is to make sure that we provide professional development for our Realtor members, professional standards enforcement. That's the code of ethics. We'll talk about that, I guess, a little bit later. And our primary goal, our primary service is advocacy. We're probably the only organization in the state, maybe even in the entire country, that advocates on issues that impact homeowners and property owners directly, whether it's tax issues, zoning laws, those things that impact the ownership, the ability to sell and transfer real estate. Your realtor is part of that community that advocates on behalf of homeowners and property owners all across the state.
So one of the things that being a practitioner and being a realtor, two different things, right? I oftentimes explain and say to people that person gets a license, that's a licensee, so that's an agent. The person that puts their hand up and says, hey, this is what I'm going to do, that's the person that, if you will, that's a realtor. And there's usually other things that kind of differentiate. What is, and you made mention of advocacy, so we're going to drill in on that here as well, Nick, but what is the true value in using a realtor, like making sure that this person is engaged or otherwise a part of the organization? What's the true value in that?
So the simplest way to put it, Corwyn, is your realtor is going to be your safety blanket in the real estate transaction. And by that, I mean, The sale of real estate is probably the most over-regulated transaction on the face of the earth. And if any of you have gone through a closing lately, you know the stack of paper after paper after paper that you've got to go through. Well, your realtor is your trusted advisor through that process. And when we survey buyers, especially first time buyers, they don't even know the questions to ask during that process.
Mm.
And the realtor helps them identify issues that may come up in an inspection report that they don't understand or can't follow. They help them understand what the seller is identifying on their disclosure report. They help them address possible zoning issues. Is a train track running behind that border of trees that you can't see behind the property? Your realtor helps you feel confident that you're making the right financial decision. For most South Carolinians, buying a home, buying property is the largest financial investment they'll ever make, right? And you want to make sure that investment doesn't result in financial ruin, in distress, divorce, or worse, right? You want to be confident that you're making the right decision, and your realtor guides you through that process. They know the market, they know the conditions of what's happening in that community, they know what's happening with all the various financial aspect of the transaction, and can advise their clients on helping them make the best decision.
So for our listeners, I want to insert something here because realtors don't have quote unquote, we ain't got the little Ouija board. We don't have the magic 8 ball. I remember that in school. You shake the ball and the stuff come up and whatever. And unfortunately, we ain't got tarot cards and none of that stuff. And if that's your thing, that's your thing, right? But we don't have that. We don't have a crystal ball that tells us exactly what's going to happen at all times. However, we do have the information and the resources to be sure to cover, to essentially address potential pitfalls and things in a transaction. So,
Absolutely. I mean, the realtor members have the benefit of decades of research and data that are
mm,
available to them on what's happening locally, what's happening in their county or statewide. Remember, a lot of times folks will see these national forecasts, right? And saying, or here's where housing is heading. Real estate is local, right, Corwin? I mean, that's like turning to the news and saying, well, the forecast for rain in the US is 50% tomorrow. Well, that's very helpful. Not. So, what you need to drill down into your local community. And that's where your realtor is that trusted expert, your local expert.
some people, it's all interpretation, right? So talk on what you talk about that national and all this stuff, and everybody gets caught up into it. I looked at something funny, but it's true. I literally looked at a piece of property, it came up, piece of property in Florida or something, and it said that it was waterfront. So I pulled the property up, I'm looking at the property. It ain't waterfront, there's a ditch behind it. It's a ditch. So I'm like, wait a minute. They said
Uh,
sitting on water. I'm like, wait a minute. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe when I looked at, I'm like, well, maybe that is a little bit, maybe it's a canal because the someplace in Florida, Fort Lauderdale area, some of those areas that have these inlets and all these.
Maybe it was classified by the EPA that way. I don't know.
Ah, but it's a ditch. I look, it's a ditch. So knowing that, that's a different level of information to have an understanding and knowledge of that. So Nick, we talked about advocacy. Literally most recently I've talked about the value of engagement and in the advocacy space, things that the Realtor organization is at the table to make sure that we work to preserve as a whole. 1031 tax exchanges. Lord, it seems every time we turn around, that is something that is considered to be either taken, stripped, mined down, or whatever. For the average potential home buyer, average home seller, what does our advocacy do that protects them in their local markets?
Depending on the market, Corwin, there are a number of issues that come up every single year regarding could be a zoning issue, it could be a local tax issue, it could be a new school impact fee that's being discussed or debated. Things that all can impact communities and impact future tax liability. If you're an existing homeowner, you're probably saying, well, why do I care about an impact fee that my neighbor might have to pay if they're just moving into the community? Well, those impact fees add to the cost of the home. The consumer, you got to follow the money when anytime we're talking tax policy, financial policies, you got to follow the money. The consumer pays, the buyer pays that fee and the final cost of the home. And guess what? that price now becomes the next set of comps for future appraisals, which are used for future property tax assessments. And it's a snowball effect. So whether it's a growth moratorium, whether are looking at making sure that a community has the right infrastructure, roads and fire and police and all the other services that are needed to properly serve a community, realtors are at the table making sure that the growth that's occurring in South Carolina is growing by leaps and bounds by any measure, that
Mhm.
grows in a responsible way that meets the needs of its people.
So that's one of the things that, again, the average consumer doesn't understand. So let's twist this a little bit. And the average agent, where is it that they're either not seeing or not understanding what the association is doing for them?
As I mentioned earlier, there are 30,000 realtor members right across the state. And we have regular communication and outreach, whether it's email, whether it's our virtual. We have our own podcast. It's not quite as fancy as this setup, Corwyn. I love what you got here. But we also communicate by video, we do town hall webinars and seminars and in-person outreach as well. And so we try to be where the member is, whether it's on Facebook or any of the other social media channels too. And not every realtor has the time to serve on a committee, to play a leadership role, but they want the information. They need the information. So
Mhm.
we output our information through a number of channels. Because at the end of the day, what we stress to not only our members, but we should also be stressing to our consumers. Knowledge is power. Knowledge empowers you to make great decisions, to move forward with confidence that you are buying a property that's going to meet the needs of you and possibly your family. Information is king in real estate, just like any other industry. And professional real estate licensees focus on enhancing their own professionalism. And the way they do that is through education and by continually updating their market data, their research, knowing what's happening in their communities.
So, Nick, I'm going to ask you a question here. One, what I heard and what you just said. So, if you're a consumer working with an agent, make sure your agent is engaged and involved. Hey, look, are you, and then send them. If they're not at the table, so to speak, if they're not engaged or not utilizing the tools and the resources that have been made, quote unquote, available to them in their membership, encourage them to do so. All right. But getting beyond that, and this is a hard question, it's one of those things that sometimes consumers say because they don't have full understanding or don't have understanding. Let me say it that way. I ain't gonna say a full understanding, but just wherever their understanding is, it just stops here. And it's a hard question, Nick. So just to preface it, there is sometimes a belief within the market that realtors or real estate agents, because that can be a broad term and broad stroke in this one, that we control the market, that we set pricing and all these other things that go on. There's really a belief there. How do you, if posed with that question, how do you respond to that as to how the realtor is engaged in the market and what influence, if any influence, does that realtor have?
Well, there are a number of ways to address that. And I guess from a consumer point of view, my advice would always be work with a realtor that fits your needs, right? That doesn't necessarily mean you're going to marry the first realtor that you meet. You know, when you go to the shoe store, you try on a couple of different pairs of shoes before you pick one, right? You want the one that fits just right. And
Ooh, it's good stuff.
and I know we're laughing about it, but it's a serious relationship that you're going to make with your realtor. I mean, your realtor is there for to listen to your life story, to listen to your life dreams.
Mm,
And you've got to be able to connect with that person. And under a lot of consumers, they have interactions with real estate agents who immediately put forward documents and things for signatures. And yes, there are certain things that you have to agree to before you show property. And there's some technical steps that by law and other reasons that realtors have to abide by. But consumers need to work with realtors that fit their dreams, fit what their vision of their dream is. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with interviewing realtors to determine who is going to work best with you. Realtors all have different value propositions. There is no controlling of the market, and the terms, fees, relationships are all negotiable between the parties, not set by law. So encourage consumers. You're making the most important financial decision of your life. Why
Mhm.
wouldn't you work with somebody that you really like, that understands what your wants and needs are? Until you are in a formal written contractual relationship, you're not. And that's an opportunity to explore the different values and services that realtors bring to the table.
So what Nick said, y'all, was look here, don't y'all buy that first pair of Adidas. There might be a better pair of Nikes or something on the shelf, or maybe some Hokas over there somewhere or another that might be just right. So I get that. I get that. So Nick, you touched on something in there that I think is very relevant. Obviously, we've had a lot of, and I won't say changes because I don't believe them to be changes as much as it's been a lot of clarification and a lot of clarity. That's because we've been dialing in, so to speak, because there's been a process or certain things that have to be done. There's been always been law. There's always been regulations, et cetera, that have existed, but we dialed in here maybe over the last year and change where that's coming from. But you made mention of documents or things that need to be acknowledged or signed like in the early stages. So state of South Carolina requires agency disclosure.
That's correct.
Now, that agency disclosure, if you don't mind, for everyone, explain one what that is. So, because people, I get it. You meet an agent's telling you, and now a lot of agents are, when you're on the phone, they're saying, well, hey, I need you to sign this before I even meet with you. What is that? Who does it protect? And when does it need to be executed? If you could touch on those.
Yeah, just a high level overview. When you interact with a real estate licensee in South Carolina, the licensee is required at that first, and the law says substantive contact. So you meet somebody in person, that's substantive contact. They knock on your door, that's substantive contact. A telephone call can be substantive contact. Even interaction over a website could be substantive contact, depending on the context of it. But state law requires, the real estate commission requires that licensee to provide an explanation of their agency services. And this is where the agent explains who they represent, who they're working for, what that means, where their duties and loyalties lie. An overview of the various services are available under state law, and the agent also is allowed and able to describe the services that they offer. And that's required as part of that disclosure process. It's required to be signed by the parties. It's not a contractual agreement. There's no compensation addressed or any obligation in that sense. It's just merely an acknowledgement that they've received that explanation. And South Carolina, I know oftentimes, Corwyn, we love to get criticized by folks for being last and everything, but South Carolina was one of the first states in the country to protect consumers with this type of disclosure. We were one of the first states in the country to require buyer agency agreements. These are explanations of agency duties and compensation that are disclosed with clients up front. And a lot of that stuff can get buried in a lot of legalese. But the main thing that, as a consumer, number one, make sure that your agent is providing you this information. If they're not, you've got to ask, what else are they not telling you? Find a realtor, a real estate agent that is following the law, that is complying with the law, and making sure that they do these disclosures that are needed. And number two, that disclosure process is all about having a transparent relationship
Mm.
so that you know what services are being offered. That protects the licensee. The licensee explains what that is going to cost, what their fees are, how they get compensated. That protects the consumer and provides for a fully transparent relationship, which again, we go back to this trusted advisor
Mm.
idea. Your
Mm.
trusted advisor is going to tell you what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, and how they're going to get paid for it. And if somebody is not being transparent with you in that way, you may want to interview another licensee, another agent.
So when you talk about that, Nick, as you put that into perspective, the first thing I think about is a patient or physician relationship. First thing I think about. Now, granted, we ain't over here performing brain surgery. We ain't quote unquote pulling nobody back from the brink, so to speak.
Emotionally sometimes, maybe
Well,
not physically.
well, that's fair. That's fair. So the only time you see a physician make decisions without input from the patient is when the patient is incapacitated, when they can't. Trauma, whatever. Okay, They're going to perform life saving, try to bring you back or what have you, or bring you back, right? We're not in that. We're not there. So when you go in for a surgery consult, physician's gonna, hey, look, this is what we're gonna do, this how we're gonna do it, this is what it's gonna look like. That's what the realtor does to an extent. That's how we work. We ain't just gonna whip out a knife and start cutting on you without talking to you. We gonna, hey, this is what we gotta do, this is how this needs to work. And then we move forward and facilitate from there. But thank you for that clarity, because oftentimes consumers are concerned. They're scared. They think if they meet with a realtor, they got to pay a realtor. And that's not the case. It's like, I mean, it's not. You meet with somebody doesn't mean you got to pay them. Now, if they work for you, that's a different story.
Let's be clear. Realtors do not work for free.
I get it.
Uh, and that's disclosed up front. But there to establish that relation before you establish that formal relationship, your realtor is going to explain. Here are the services I offer. Here are the things that I do. Maybe they tell you also the things that they're not going to do. So you have a clear understanding of what their job is going to be and how they're going to get paid.
So, Nick, I'm going to hit you with this one. All right. Because on our show, we have a lot of investors that we bring on. Some of them are merely sharing their stories. Some of them are, hey, this is how you do it. Some of them have written books and some podcasts. I mean, just the whole gambit. And a prevalent theme, and I always, work to, if I catch it, I give a disclaimer in there, because South Carolina, each state has its own rules and regulations. And sometimes when people take information from someone that's operating in a different state, they think that the rules and regulations are the same everywhere, where they're not. And one of the things that we run into oftentimes and discuss or come up on this show is the process or practice of wholesaling in real estate, investment real estate. Now, you and I were at a meeting and it was said just as plain and clear that it requires a license in this state. Now, there's been some modifications, some changes, updates, if you will, for clarification. And that, I think that's the season that we're in. We're in a clarity season, because everything that's been changing that practitioners are struggling with understanding isn't new. It's clarification. It's clarity. So if you don't mind, can you touch on that and provide your input and insight into that?
Well, I think with the issue of wholesaling, it may be more than just providing clarity. The legislature last year passed legislation addressing wholesaling, specifically the practice where they found activity that they were concerned about that was maybe targeting those individuals in a way that harmed the equity in their home, that harmed the original owner's position in the home. And what the legislature tried to address is stopping that type of activity. The Real Estate Commission has issued a guidance letter on wholesaling. And I don't know, Corwyn, if you have the ability to link that or send out a note on that. But if you go to Google South Carolina Real Estate Commission, it's right there on their front page, called Wholesaling and Assignment of Contracts. And the Real Estate Commission identifies some rules for licensees, for real estate licensees, on how they can market and advertise assignment contracts, and trying to peel that onion and say, okay, these types of resale activities are okay, these types are not, and
Mhm.
trying to provide some clarity in that regard. Because before the license law was updated and before this opinion letter came out, it really was kind of the Wild West. There were unlicensed individuals, in my opinion, practicing real estate, which requires a license, doing things that probably should be under the purview of the Real Estate Commission. So this is an attempt to provide some clarity. They were just knowing what's going on in the market and with some of these situations. I expect further clarification, if that's the right way to put it. But this will continue to be a topic, because I think there are some bad actors out there in the marketplace, but I also think there are a lot of great mom and pop investors and others that provide a very much needed resource in the marketplace. Sometimes drawing that line between good and bad can be a very difficult thing for the legislature to do.
That makes perfect sense. One of the things I want to make sure that our listeners understand is that no one's saying that you can't make money, that you can't run a profitable business, that you can't provide, if you will, service or what have you. But one of the things that, as you kind of look at it, Nick, and I imagine you agree with this, but matter of fact, I saw this, I say somewhat recently, where every industry in our state has a limitation. Like, you can sell a certain number of cars yourself before you need a dealer's license. That's practice. That is in law. And I've seen that actually change up recently, where somebody had been, I guess they've been flipping cars, if you will, and now they have to have a license. So that should not be a surprise in this industry that certain activities require either licensure and or regulation because it falls under the purview of what a license is required for. So, Nick, if you don't mind, give our listeners, as we wrap up, your thoughts on what consumers should and what we should look forward to, or what we're looking forward to. I guess I'll frame it that way because nobody knows if it's good or bad. We don't establish we don't have a crystal ball. If I did, I'd be hitting lottery every day and I'd be in Tahiti with a Mai Tai. I'll probably be in Bali right now. I think I'll be in Bali right now versus Tahiti. But anyway, but the short version is we don't have a crystal ball, but as we go forward, legislative and advocacy efforts and all the other things that quote unquote affect Realtor, what should consumers as well as agents be mindful of as we go forward?
Well, I guess one of the questions that we probably get from consumers a lot, Corwin, is now a right time to buy or is now a right time to sell, right? That's another magic 8 ball question. And the bottom line is life happens. And whether you're downsizing because you're an empty nester or you got twins on the way or something that's causing you to move or you've been hired or fired or all these things that happen in your life that create housing events. And unfortunately, those housing events aren't timed to up and down swings in the market, right? Those happen independently. And so the answer is always going to be, what's happening in your life and what do you need right now? If you need to buy a house right now, then you better buy a house. If you need to sell a house right now, you better sell it. One thing that South Carolina has going for it that I'm very optimistic. I'm always asked about, well, what's the future of real estate look like in South Carolina? And we don't need a magic 8 ball. We look at the data, we look at the metrics, and South Carolina has been outperforming most of the states in the Southeast, certainly outperforming the national picture when it comes to job creation, migration numbers. More people are moving to South Carolina than ever before. I just saw in the paper that the city of Florence added 1,000 new people in the last 4 years since COVID. And statewide, then we're still the number one move to state in the country. And why is that? We've got good economic climate for folks who create jobs. There's a lot of fun things to do in South Carolina. Quality of life is very high. Still working on the per capita income, trying to get those numbers bumped up, but those numbers are moving in the right direction. Our schools are improving. We have a good healthcare system, all those things that add up to a very high quality of life. And for those homeowners that are listening, South Carolina has the lowest homeowner property tax in the country. And we won't talk about second homes or rental. That's another show. But for owner occupied, it's among the best rates in the country. So South Carolina has a lot of great things going for it. The Lowcountry, the community that you serve, takes that to another level. And in the Lowcountry, we're talking about traffic and growth issues and development and how we plan for future growth. And so those are all good challenges to have. And we've got great local elected leaders that I know are concerned and are working toward positive solutions on all those issues. But South Carolina is, I think, poised to continue to grow. A lot of talk nationally about a seller's market switching to a buyer's market. And we have seen some markets soften up. But the numbers, if you're waiting for a 2008 type of recession, I just don't see how that happens. We don't have the inventory. We don't have the glut of condos and things that we had back in '08. Banks stopped throwing mortgages in your window as you drove through the drive-through. They actually check and make sure you've got a job now. The standards have gotten tightened up. So those same metrics aren't around anymore. So I'm hard pressed, barring, God forbid, some national event or international news. It's South Carolina's poised for a bright future.
Look, Nick, I appreciate that. Look, I literally had a vision, a visual of somebody in the drive-through, and they hold on, let me get this mortgage, put this mortgage in the canister, and send that mortgage out to you in the drive-through. I literally had that visual.
I won't share any personal examples.
Nick, thank you so much, man, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be on with us today. I felt it warranted that people hear from you, from the industry, from this perspective, because there's all these components that are part of it. I mean, obviously, you got brokerages that circle and agents with brokerages. You have the finance piece of it that's not necessarily a part of, but as an industry, it's a part of. The association kind of sits, it's kind of like an icing, if you will, across the industry, in my opinion. If we're building a cake, you got layers in there, but the frosting, the sweet spot, if you will, of the industry is the association. And you can take that and use that. You can send it on up to NAR if you want to.
I like it. I haven't had lunch, so I'm still, that makes me happy.
But to me, it is. It's really, it fills in the middle and it sweetens the industry by and or makes it more palatable, whatever, because maybe instead of stacking a cake, maybe you're stacking something else. But short version is that maybe it's biscuits and gravy. That might have made you hungry. But either way, that's how I envision it. So I appreciate you coming in today and sharing with us, if you will, that icing or giving us the gravy. So I really appreciate you taking the time today to do so.
No, my pleasure, Corwyn. Thank you for having me. And for those of you that are listening, if you ever have a sour bite, please, one of my favorite sayings is professionalism starts at the top. If you have a bad experience with a realtor, the Real Estate Commission and the South Carolina Association of Realtors has an ethics complaint, a license law complaint process. We encourage those actions to be reported. But I know that working with a trusted local advisor is going to enhance your home buying experience, and work with a realtor. You won't regret it. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So, Nick, again, thank you. Thank you for being part of Exit Strategy Radio Show family. And to our listeners, guys, look, y'all know how I feel. Y'all know what I say. Always put it together and deliver it to you this way, which is to tell you that I love you. I love you. And we're going to see you guys out there in those streets.